What's up, guys? This is Farouk here. We're in Vallejo, California at Crick Felipe's private fab shop, and we're installing the version 2 Wisefab kit on a crossmember because it needs to be modified, and we're here to show you kind of how it's done and what you need to do.
People are gonna be like, are your scissors big enough? I'm gonna be like, yeah. This is Z hard.
So Crick found this mint condition S14 subframe. You need the one that's been saved in the backyard to make sure it's good. But no, we checked all the pinch welds from the factory to make sure that everything was straight. There wasn't any tweakage anywhere. Make sure you check the bolt holes that go to lower arms, that they're not ovaled out or warped. And just overall, just kind of look over it, make sure it's not tweaked in any way, because you don't want to put all this work into a effed up subframe.
And it's mint green, so you know it's mint. I just put the Wisefab supplied templates on the subframe and just Sharpied it out. They're kind of, you know, this is a paper template going on something with a lot of angles, so you're going to need to use your best judgment to put it on there in which you think is straight. You know, you're going to want to look at it in a straight line versus like hold this to it straight, because in the long run you'll get a bow. Like, make sure you look at it and think you're trying to draw a straight line on a curved surface. So
you just want to make sure that you're working in a way that it clearances it. And yeah, even if these parts are just a little bit off because of that paper template, you'll be fine, I think. Yeah, and if you look how Crick did it, he actually used magnets, which makes life a lot easier for getting that template on there. Well,
any K-member that's been laying in the dirt in some yard has less miles than one that's been bolted to a car for all these years. Don't make me turn all red on you. Don't make me show you my Irish.
We realized Irish drifters are the best, so we're just going to start putting Irish flags on our cars.
Yeah, do you see this green K-member? We have love the colors.
I'm no longer half British, half Polish, half American. There's a slight difference in the 13 and the 14 cross members. The 13 cross member has kind of a steeper angle at this point. So if your template doesn't fit perfectly, you can notice that it's key just to align it with the bottom and then that motor mount groove in there. But the 13 cross member, as you can see in this picture, it's got a little bit different of an angle there. So when you get it like that, you should be all right. It should be the same spacing as long as you get your hole and your motor mount point lined up.
Since we are fans of following instructions, after we get our Sharpie marks everywhere from our templates, we want to drill this out.
The 14, and they provide the bolt and bracing for it, but that's probably because now that everything's been altered, you still want to make sure it's strong and that your lower arm is going to be stable within that section.
It's like throwing a hot dog down the hallway.
I think the motto is cut first, think later.
The model is when you cut it and it's cut too short, you always cut it a second time and then wonder why it's still too short. Then you whip out the board stretcher.
Yeah. Where's my other $200 fucking subframe? So if you're trying to do this at home, or you're a fab shop that wants to see if you're doing it the same way that we are, take a look at these lines and just kind of, that's where we're at. And then we're going to flip it on its side to show you where we ended up in here. Now we'll clean this up with a flapper to the point where it won't
There went my disc.
Let's do one last shot from the bottom. That way you guys kind of see what needs to be done.
We're going to get you really close with these templates.
Yep.
But it's on you to get yourself to where you're ready to weld.
Exactly. My favorite Polish...
I was eating blue cheese last night that was absolutely disgusting, but that's what made it good.
Yeah,
yeah.
we talk about the problem that we're running into first?
Yeah, let's.
Okay. So this this kit that we have here is a 14 kit, but the brace seems to be for a 13 kit. And the way you see that is that when you try to bolt it down, so the 14 and the 13 subframes are just slightly, the 14 is just slightly wider in bolt holes than the 13. And the other difference that's pretty apparent is that the angle of this motor mount is more drastic. So if you look at, we have a 13 motor mount here, bolted on the ground, and the brace just goes directly over the motor mounts, since perfectly flush. And the idea behind that brace is it's not something that you will obviously use when the subframe's finished, but while you're welding, it's to prevent the subframe from warping. And the cool thing is that we're doing this with Crick because Crick's done probably 100 of his own subframes. He's modded his own, and so we're at a turning point where we're wondering, do we clearance this, hog out these holes to make this work for the 14 subframe, or do we just weld it? What's your take?
I think that if the Wisefab rack location is fixtured well enough with the sleeves that they've provided us with, I think that we could get away with, if we tack this in the correct sequence to where it doesn't pull and distort, I think we'll be fine getting away with welding this without this brace.
We have to hog out the holes a little bit.
No, all in all, I think it's a pretty straightforward drop-in piece.
Yeah.
Once you get past the cutting everything up in the correct manner, it pretty much goes right on. I haven't ran into anything that, as a fabricator, I would see as being more than I would expect to take on. This is pretty much everything that I expected. Yeah. It's done pretty well. Like, everything fits very well, actually.
For being a mass production.
For being a mass production part, it fits very well.
Yeah.
Fusing some of these gaps, tacking this Wisefab cross member in, and trying not to apply a bunch of heat to anywhere so that I can get it nice and, you know, I want it to remain straight and not pull a bunch. So I'm kind of just working around getting a bunch of tacks everywhere.
MIG's fine.
MIG is just 100% fine. I mean, the thing is, it's just spot welded.
Look at those MIG welds. So what do you think people should do after they weld it in? Should they powder coat it or just paint it? What's your school of thought?
If you're a real hardcore drifter, you probably just want to paint it because you're probably going to tear it out of the car. Crashing into somebody, like Faruker here.
I do that well. I want to walk you guys through some of the new features on the version 2 S-Chassis kit. They've got an adjuster which allows you to run either the same arm for the S13, which is also the R32 lower arm, or the S14, S15, which is also the same as the R33 and R34 lower arm. So the base arm doesn't change, which is rad, because that way you can share spares with your buddies at the track. And it makes things a lot easier to manage. They also include now a sway bar mount, which is rad for those guys that want a little less front grip and to use front sway bar. So yeah, that's pretty rad development that they've changed on the version 2. A couple more of the interesting differences. The top hat for the version 2 has changed. Here's a closer look at it. So now you're able to adjust caster for the top hat quite easily. You have a decent amount of adjustment there. That is that's a 1/2 inch drive hole. So if you have like a 1/2 inch socket with an extension, you can put it in there. And Obviously, to turn the caster while it's in the car, even if you have it jacked up, is going to be hard. So you loosen all the bolts, put the 1/2 inch drive in there, and you crank on it, and it'll turn it so that way you can adjust the caster easily. Now that the rack is pushed so far forward, you get into an issue where you're not actually using all the bite point of the rack. So the steering column into the rack, and they created a little extender, which you put your old steering column into, and that goes into your rack. It just extends it just a little bit, which makes it nice and usable. And here are the new straight rack spacers. So the reason that you need a rack spacer is, one, because the tie rods, well, they could have just made a longer tie rod, but that wouldn't have worked because the thread pitch that goes into the Nissan rack is different than the 1.5 pitch we talked about earlier. So the new kit's rad. I mean, they're thinking of more and more things. They've really stepped up the game and created a championship winning kit for the masses.
Dude, I was frying this cheese last night, Shane.
All done now, and it looks really good. It stayed true. Crick's welds are outstanding. The MIG welds look like TIG welds almost. And yeah, what's your impressions of the kit, Crick?
I think it's fairly straightforward. Wisefab did a pretty good job of templating everything and giving us a very well thought out route to follow. So with little modification to the K-member, it's now ready to have the steering rack pushed forward just about as much as possible. I don't think there's anything on the market pushing the rack forward this much. It's pretty extensive. There's
for the guys out there who want it,
not much K-member left there. So if you look at this area here, we've narrowed that down from roughly a 2-inch beginning to that's maybe 3/4 of an inch overall thickness now. It does get the strength back by this bottom channel. So they've actually broken under the rack and given a bunch of strength back. I'm curious to see how they hold up in a crash.
right?
When love comes in, oh la la la. Love comes in, oh la la la.
Do you have Facebook?